Hey, this is Al. It's week 9. I am higher than a kite, not because of any chemical aids or even caffeinated aids, just because I'm in such a good mood. Week 9, ModPo, okay, it's a long haul for us, those of us who are leading this crazy shenanigans. In week 9, I'm not saying I'm happy that it's almost over. I'm feeling very connected to the ModPo people. Maybe it's because I set up my office hours for Wednesday mornings right before the webcast. And the ModPo people are so great. They're so great. And I'm also happy because I have this Brady Bunch thing. It's like a perfect 9 today. When you look at the gallery view, that's because a few of our friends are out for various reasons. We're all looking at the Brady Bunch 9.
Yay.
And I am so... Oh, there's Gabby messing up the Brady Bunch 9. Hi, Gabby.
Hi, sorry.
We were perfect 9. I was spieling on about the 9. But anyway,
I had this moment where I was like, I was in therapy and then I finished therapy and I was like, what am I doing now? I'll just get a snack. I'm going to relax. And I was like, fuck, I have an appointment like right now.
So you repressed, denied, and forgot. See, I don't even charge $200 an hour.
It's the dangers of therapy.
Try me, Gabby. Well, it's good to see you. But also the Brady Bunch theme, such as it is, makes me think that there is this fabulous sibling pal. I think of Davey as kind of a sibling, a pal who's joined us here for the, I think, second and maybe last time. Because Davey's doing all kinds of cool things. I'm actually going to ask Davey to tell folks, Davey fans and others, what he's been doing. But just so good to see you. Davey's joining us for week 9. Davey, before we get started, did you just get people caught up on what you've been doing lately and what's exciting?
Missing ModPo mostly.
Oh.
It's really a full-time job. I've been teaching at the College of New Jersey this fall, and I'm starting a postdoc in architecture actually at Princeton in the spring. So I will continue to be in Philly for at least a minute doing that, but mostly just pining for ModPo and missing all of you.
Davey, you're so good for a person relatively young. I'm just going to say that, relatively young. You're so good at just being... Everything you say includes other people and is thankful and grateful. You know how to be grateful, which is really a talent, I think, without it seeming smarmy. Yeah. Okay.
I get it from years of watching you, Al. You're very good at it.
See, that's my point. You did it again. You're the kind of person when somebody says, how are you? There's like 4 seconds of that, and then suddenly, but how are you doing? And then you feel like, okay. Before we go, I'm going to do a round of favorite poems from this week's syllabus, ModPo main syllabus, or ModPo Plus. Tell us what is really, this is a way of recommending things to people, and maybe briefly why. But before, I just want to remind people what the phone number is, and also ask various folks here in our Zoom to pick up some ways of seeing what the ModPo people have to say. So, first of all, the phone number is 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208. You can Skype, especially if you're overseas, or you just prefer Skype, at ModPo Pen, all one word, P-E-N-N at the end, ModPo Pen. Chris Martin is standing by. So if you call in the next minute or so, you'll wait for the round of favorite poems, and then we'll pick you up right away. Okay. Facebook. Is there any people who are still left on Facebook? Who's a Facebook person? Nobody's admitting to that.
I can do it.
Thank you, Jason. Okay. Lily, Twitter. Oh, right. Yes, there's a thumbs up. The ModPo thread, Dave usually does it, but Dave isn't here today. Allie, would you do the ModPo thread? Are you able to find it? Yep. Thank you. And YouTube chat. How about Jake and Gabby? How does that sound for ModPo chat? That's the YouTube chat, right? Okay. So let's go around. Favorite poems this week and briefly why, starting with Lily, followed by Erica.
Oh boy. Okay. I was ready for this because you warned us in advance over email, Al, but I'm gonna go with Not a Cage, Joan Retallack.
Not a cage. Okay,
I know
why?
will be a popular answer, but I just I love the poem itself, and I love how it works together with the chance operation. I think it's so relatable to have a stack of books that you're not exactly reading, but like in the conventional cover to cover sense, let's say, but you are working through or moving through in some way by taking first lines as in the poem. So I just love the possibility that opens for writing and for relating to your books, like books on your shelf, but maybe you didn't have time to read them all today.
Right. Love that. Okay, good suggestion, Lily. Thank you. Let's go to Erica, followed by Jason.
I would second Not a Cage for similar reasons and add that I would also highly recommend the excerpt, The Poetical Wager by Joan Retallack, that's in ModPo Plus, which is a chapter from a full book with the same title that is extraordinary in the way that I think it offers a lens through which to think about the importance of aleatory and chance and procedural poetries as far as reorienting the ways that our geometries of attention might point on any given day.
Perfectly said. And two quick thoughts before we turn to Jason. First thought is, you'll notice that in the ModPo Plus section on that, it says video coming later or coming soon. Lainey's been bothering me about this. Bothering is the wrong word, but Lainey's been reminding me that we should do that one. And Erica is coming to Philadelphia next Wednesday. And maybe, although it's going to be a busy day, a triple header as it is, maybe we can find time to do a video on the Poetical Wager then. If not, Erica, we want you to come down. And so maybe we can get a Philly group together to do that next Wednesday. And there was another thought. My other thought is that the office hour people this morning, they had all been to your office hour maybe the night before, and they all wanted to talk about Poetical Wager. They had so much to say about the wager. And they thought that ModPo is kind of a wager. I think they got that idea from you. Yeah. Very cool. Okay. Jason, we're looking for a quick recommendation of a poem and why, followed by Davey.
I guess what I should say is my poem, Making Butter, which is in ModPo.
Yeah, I love that poem. Another one where we don't have the video yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's video of the people making butter.
And there's a video of you performing the poem. So we have several videos. We don't have the ModPo people talking about it, though.
Right. Yes, we need to fix that. And but not of my poems, I think this time around, I really was grooving on a feathered likeness of the Justice Chair. It just, I've been just on my own reading a lot of Stein since we did Stein and feeling like it's a kind of beautiful collaboration between me and McCloskey and Stein.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, just beautiful phrases.
Thank you. That's the Stein series, and it's Stein number 100 in the series that Jackson McCloskey did. Okay, Davey, followed by Lainey.
I think today mine has got to be dropping leaflets. I think for the day after Election Day. And I love the epigraph of that poem, helped me come up with a strategy to get through this white noise and to think about this as a poem that's 20 years old. That epigraph is from November 2001. And to think about a degree of white noise 20 years ago and degree of white noise now. And also to think about Week 9 and aleatory and chance operations as being strategic, as being a strategy for dealing with more language than it is possible to be attentive to. And that the poem, both Osmond's poem and the Week 9 poems generally, might offer a strategy for being with language when language seems so overwhelming as to be non-specific, but desperately needs to be specific to pay attention to the work it does in the world.
Beautiful. And Davey, give us not 3, but 4 synonyms for strategy.
Ooh, 4 synonyms. Method.
Method.
I think I see Erica and I come up with the word prosthetic because of a class she taught a decade ago. That still shapes the way I think every day. Gabby is giving me plan, which I think is great. And I'm going to give you a phrase for the 4th one, which is practice of attention.
Can you define that last one? That's a phrase, not a word, but that's good enough.
Sure. Basically, a way of deciding what to pay attention to. That like so much of the goal of like what we're doing in ModPo is thinking about how poems help us pay attention to things that either evade language or the language that we have for them is insufficient to what the things actually are. And a practice of attention might be a procedure like Osmondhausen dropping leaflets, or a set of conditions or a set of constraints for deciding what to pay attention to, and then how to keep paying attention to that thing once you've decided how you want to pay attention to it.
Great. Thank you for doing that. So basically, we're talking about choosing what to attend, and that is a big deal throughout ModPo, right? So poems tend, modern and contemporary poems, tend to offer you a bunch of things that you might dwell on almost as a way of seeing if they can get you, the writer can get you to think in ways or tend to things in ways that you hadn't noticed before. And close reading is actually a strategy for shifting people's attention as well. Okay, that's great. Lainey, followed by Kate. Recommendation?
I'm going to say Jackson McCloskey's A Feather Likeness of the Justice Chair. Because Jackson McCloskey creates this permission and invitation to make your own system, and he does it over and over with this brilliance and benevolence. And because he said he became a pacifist anarchist in grammar school.
Yeah, he did say that a lot. Anarcho-pacifist is his word, anarcho-pacifist. Yeah, he claimed he was an anarcho-pacifist at 14, but that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Very sweet temperament. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So say again why that poem.
It offers up an endless invitation to not just employ chance, but to invent your own formulas. Yes. I mean, Jackson was always saying, invent your own. Don't use mine. Don't use this person's or that person's.
Right.
Just make your own system.
Right. Perfect.
And then follow it.
And then follow it to the letter, because
fastidiously.
He did not. Fastidiously was a word for him. That's
yeah.
Right. Kate, followed by Jake.
I'm going to go with McCloskey's Vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore for its performance element. Not only does the writing scramble ready-made meanings of language structures, but it disables the communicative function of language. And the performance becomes almost like theater of the absurd, where speaking bodies in real time struggle to mean and communicate, almost like in a Ionesco play.
I'm really glad we've been taking to do this at the beginning of our webcast. First of all, it loosens everybody up, but it also just, God, we get these fabulous little short recommendations, such as what Kate just did for that poem. So fabulous. Thank you. Jake, followed by Allie.
Hey, so I'm going to join Lily and Erica in plugging Joan Retalic's poem, but I want to specifically give a shout out to the audio version that's available on ModPo website. I found the piece a little inaccessible at first, but the audio in it, she gives like a brief snippet of her, to use Gabby's phrase, of her plan for this poem, and then that changes the practice of attention, of listening as you get through the piece. Like it's just like it becomes immediately fun. Like as you listen and watch, it's really nice to have that there on the ModPo website.
And the audio introduction actually gets a laugh out of the audience when she talks about discarding the books and how it assuages, I think she says guilt, assuages the guilt that she feels. And there's a laughter in the audience. Allie, followed by Knar.
Loving Jason's making butter this week.
Why? What's so fun about that?
Well, first of all, I think it like may very well be the funniest poem in anywhere. But I'm seeing some, I don't know, there are a lot of good, I guess, contenders for that. But I also just love how as you progress through the poem, you kind of realize that like the process of making butter is both like can be, I mean, butter is such a kind of everyday, like mundane thing, and yet making it is this like wondrous, amazing, like mind-blowing thing. And I think it also kind of gets me out of my like very like word-centric head for a moment, because especially in week 9, I'm thinking a lot about like the process of like making poems and accidentally making poems and making meaning, and something about contemplating actually like making butter to like be eaten is a nice contrast to that.
Yeah, it's a great recommendation. Thank you. And thank you, Jason, for making butter. Yeah, I mean, the thing about butter is that it is essentially form-seeking. It's not solid in the way, it's just, what is butter actually? You know, when do we know that it's butter? And also, I think that this week we tend to think of this week as full of people, poets, artists, who are pretty serious. I mean, Jackson was a very serious person. And I think, I think Joan is as well. You would almost say severe in their devotion to the process. And it's good to remind ourselves that there is a high hilarity on the other side, dispositionally speaking. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain amount of Dadaist, post-Dadaist, or neo-Dadaist hijinks. And I think of Jason as very much a week 9 poet who tends toward the hijinks side, but is ultimately very serious about making butter. That's really cool. Kanar, followed by Gabby.
Yeah, so I'm going to join Davey actually with dropping leaflets, which I just adore and think is such a relevant poem to us. Post-election day, and also just all the time, I guess. So I too was kind of revisiting Joan Retallack today, and I wanted to quick share a sentence from Poetical Wager. The collection of essays. In the science's intelligibility is a sign that the current paradigm is still functioning. But part of what I love about Osmond's poem is how it really is courting unintelligibility through certain forms of repetition, through really putting strain on language, to kind of beckon for a real reckoning that is, something beyond what you get from a news outlet or from a president who says, go out and buy stuff, right? To kind of recover from this national incident, right? I just think it's such a fascinating poem, and it's one you can really pour a lot of attention to bring up attention into.
Great, thank you. Gabby.
Yeah, hi. Also, here's Panini. Anyways, I'm gonna also sell Jason's poem, and I'm gonna pretend he's not in the room while I talk about it. The Room. I'm gonna say that what I think about making butter is like actually maybe gonna go a little bit against our week's principles, which is like I would almost rather like gather Jason's poems with like the work of like Lipsinka or like the sort of like, the kind of camp classics, because it's like that kind of overhearing and reframing that camp art does so well feels like the real kind of humor principle here. And so like Jason's not much of a proceduralist in most of his work. I mean, I feel like he's more of a sort of tender-hearted ironist. And I feel like what this poem shares with the other poems in that book, which is really good, plug, is tonal. And that tone feels like quite interested in like, there's something sort of like weirdly sexual about all the comments. There's something like, and also Jason reads it in his like typical sort of like slow, disconnected way, where it's like, then it becomes even more kind of like alienated and kind of like porny and sort of odd. And so, yeah, I like that poem.
I'm glad you mentioned that there's a sexual dimension to it, because every time I read that poem, I think of the chapter in Moby Dick where the guys are all gathered around making the sperm into something, and they do it collectively. And I believe that
a touch of the hand.
Yes, I believe that Jason's thing originated as a class project. Am I wrong? There was a class project, Jason, in there somewhere, right?
Class project was in kindergarten.
Okay. All right. I think we should stop. So let me just repeat the phone number, and then I have a question from the forums. 610-616-3208. We need a bold person to start us off and call us today. We'd like to hear another voice. Okay. So I'm going to read you something that Sherard Tan, who's a regular ModPo, wrote in one of the forums. And it got a bunch of responses, including one from Lainey. So I guess maybe I'll ask Lainey to start a response to this, but then let's go to Davey, Erica, and Jake after that. So Sherard is trying to understand what he sees as a potential contradiction or paradox in Cage. He notes that that one of the adages that we present in week 9, the main syllabus, one of the adages, Cage says, quote, "As far as consistency of thought goes, I prefer inconsistency." Okay, very Cagean. But then Sherard says that they found this quite confusing, as Cage's mesostic method seems to be the ultimate form of consistency. Rather than following random whims or emotions, he follows a strict scientific algorithm that is, or mathematical anyway, that is surprisingly able to bring out interesting phrases. So unless he means being inconsistent with traditional forms and structure, then it definitely makes sense. So Sherard is a little confused. So Lainey, Davey, Erica, Jake, what is Cage doing there? Is Cage being inconsistent in theorizing? Is it as simple as that?
I think there's a sense of play, and there's also a refusal to say one thing that we can understand only in one way.
Yeah.
Because that's boring, perhaps.
Right.
To be pinned down in that way.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of questions in there, though, and I think one of them has to do with, we make up systems, and how carefully do we follow them or not? Nobody really knows, right?
Well, Cage didn't even follow them consistently, even in his mesostics.
Right. So it's dynamic, I guess.
Okay.
You make a system, and then you continue to play.
Cool. Davey, your thought on this?
At the risk of being a caricature of myself, I want to read a sentence from the Adagia that I think is helpful in understanding this, which is just above the one that Sherard quoted, which is, I'm quoting from the Adagia, "I don't know when it began, but at Edwin Denby's loft on 21st Street, not at the time, but about the place, I wrote my first mesostic." And so something that we get in Cage is thinking about being attentive to different kinds of spaces and being attentive to urban space. And I wonder we don't think a lot about mesostic as urban form, but we're certainly invited to here. We're invited to think not at the time, but about the place I wrote my first mesostic, as if the mesostic is a way of synthesizing the data or information available in a particular location, in which that location is also fixed in time. And if you pay attention to urban spaces or pay attention to a room, something that Cage is obviously very interested in doing in both cases, what you get is different every time. And it's that way of making room for whatever is there, where the making of room is consistent, we get that other moment. If something is boring after 2 minutes, try it for 4. If it's still boring, then 8, then 16, and 32. Eventually one discovers that it is not boring at all, where the consistency is opening up the space and making the same kind of practice. It's almost like a meditation practice of sitting down in the same way every day or consistently, where what appears is necessarily different, but the act of making the space for something to appear is a consistent act.
Yes. And that which one meditates upon is going to be different, even though the structure of meditation is incredibly rigorously applied. Yeah. And I mean, he actually has we could collect the collected comments of Cage that have cities in them. There's a whole lot of them.
There's also mushrooms, though. Every time you said room, I thought about mushrooms.
He loves mushrooms.
Yeah.
And not a lot of those kind of mushrooms in the city of New York. Other
No.
kinds of mushrooms. Let us go then to Erica, followed by Jake. Quick thought on Sherrod's question about Cage's inconsistency.
Yeah, I would begin by amplifying something that I think I heard Lainey alluding to, which is the fact that a lot of these comments are a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So I think that there's a way in which Cage is playing with the very idea of what makes something consistent or inconsistent in making that statement. The second thing I would say is related to what Davey just said, which is that for Cage, art is always an experience, and experiences are unpredictable, so they can't be consistent. So even if you're going through a same process or you're using the same algorithm, the way that the mesostic or whatever it is exists in time and space, we don't know, because it's contingent on who's in the room.
Perfect. Thank you. And Jake, a quick final thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and mirrors the question that George Lewis, who is a great jazz composer and theorist and musician, what he wrote about Cage and the critique that he had of Cage, essentially kind of saying, well, there was a desire at the time for improvisation and like the improvisation and the consistent inconsistency that you could say that jazz improvisation offered. The Cage wanted it, but he wanted it in some other way, and he kind of like created these methods that would force inconsistencies in place, and they feel a bit forced. Like that's kind of just like summarizing this a bit, but I think that's one way of looking at it. That there's something about procedures that can feel cold, and this question of like is it really inconsistency? Is it consistency? Like that problem, like the thing about like, does it feel boring for 2 minutes and then do it for 4? Like it is boring still. I don't know. Maybe you can discover it and discover something fun inside of it. But it could also be a bit boring. I think it's a worthwhile question to ask when you're looking at Cage's stuff.
Thank you, Jake. All right, so I'm going to repeat the phone number because people are being shy today. 610-616-3208. Give us a call. But we're still going to find some unshy people out there in the various social media. For instance, in the ModPo thread, Allie, I know there's a bunch of stuff there. Can you pick one or two of those? 1 second, says
Yeah,
Allie.
sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So there's a really interesting comment from Rihanna Ismail. And she asks, is week 9 about assimilating the process to the poem and week 8 about the process after, i.e. reading?
Wow.
And then, so as if that wasn't great enough, there's a second question. Does the randomness take away the relevance of the text, or does it enhance it, the way we associate dreams with a kind of transcendence?
Wow, I love both of those questions. Thank you, both. Lily, Rahana's question. Can you I'm sorry, I'm throwing this at you without prep, but can you deal with that? So Rihanna was suggesting that Allie, help me with the distinction. Week 8 is the stuff that happens after the reading, and week 9 is the making. It's the process by which it's made. Yes?
Yeah, assimilating the process to the poem.
Okay. Lily, any suggestions in response to Rihanna?
Yeah, I think that's like, I would be cautious not to suggest that there's no process that foregrounds like the writing of other types of poems and like language poems. All poets have a process, but here I think the element of chance is the specific part of the process that we're looking at. And if you think about something like Lynn Hajinian's My Life, like think about the mix of those sentences. They're arranged in a way that resembles, like that brings about a lot of interesting juxtapositions and refutes like being linear. So there is a process there, but it's not, she didn't arrange them in a arranging by chance. She didn't put them together with a chance process, for example.
Yeah. Thank you, Allie, and thank you, Rihanna. Rihanna is a superstar ModPoer, I believe in year 1 maybe, but Rihanna and her daughter are doing ModPo together, and they always come to my, being in India, and it's like my 8 a.m. Office hour, Zoom office hour is the perfect time for Rihanna and her daughter, so I see them every week, and they're fantastic. Okay, thank you, Allie. Twitter, Lily?
Sadly, not a soul has checked in for our webcast today.
The sun of Twitter has been setting in the ModPo world.
Usually we have a couple of our long-standing pals who are following along.
Right.
Today they must be busy.
We have to start ballyhooing Twitter as if Twitter needs ballyhooing. My God, stupid thing to say. But anyway, okay, so let us go to Facebook. Jason, is there anything happening there?
Yeah, well, let's see. This something just Larry Torino just posted a pierced sequenced scale tree by Irv Wilson that is its own kind of process-based, I think, music generating diagram.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
And Margaret Stevens writes, there's a great line in Poetical Wager that it gives us the courage to forge on, to launch our hopes into the unknown, the future, by engaging positively with otherness and intelligibility. She says that's kind of week 9 to her.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret called from Tennessee last week, you may recall. And I think Margaret was one of those who came from Erica's office hour to my office hour, promulgating Joan Rotalick. Yay. Okay, and now finally for the big enchilada here is the YouTube chat. Jake, Gabby, what's happening?
Well, I can kick it off. Like there are 2 things I wanted to dig into, but one is the comment from Miranda. How is making butter similar to making poetry? This is the first thing she says, and also she says, I like Al's comment that it is form seeking. So I would love to talk about how making butter is like making poetry. Just an impetus to talk about Jason's poem some more because it's so fun and funny, and I think there are things to say there. But also, like, what does it mean for a poem to be form seeking? I think that could be nice to kick around.
That is cool. And Gabe, what else is there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were kind of hoping that this person would call and make this question, which maybe I'm stealing from them, but I'm not sure that they will call and say this question. I'm just going to say it, which is that Darlene Laguna asks, what's the relationship between the process and the poem product? Is the process more important this week? than the product, which is kind of, I mean, it's always, I think yearly, that's kind of our centered question here is like, what do we do with the difference? In this week, the process seems much more available as an aesthetic object of its own than in other weeks. Like I appreciate Lily's like correction. Good Lord, who's at my doorbell? Correction that there is like always a process. There's always a thing, but that usually it's just not foregrounded as a thing. I'm going to deal with it.
It's butter being delivered by UPS. Kate and Knar, did you hear Darlene's question as posed by Gabby well enough to respond? Kate first, Knar second. The question is, is this the week? Darlene's almost loading the question because Darlene has been associated with ModPo for at least 8 years and really knows what happens at week 9. When Al's original comment at the very, speaking of himself in the third person, at the very beginning of the course, how you say what you say is as important as what you say in a poem. In fact, how you say what you say is sometimes more important than what you say. The how of the poem is the what of the poem, and there is no such thing as a what without a how, and all that. And maybe week 9, as Gabby just suggested, is where it all gets foregrounded. Kate first, Knar second.
I don't know. I lost track of the question in there, but I think the how of saying is still very present in aleatory poetry. It's sort of anti-how in a way. It's breaking apart the built-in meanings of our programmatic language and illuminating how they're made, where they come from.
Yeah, good. Knar, your thought?
Yeah, so I'm thinking a little bit about the anecdote you offered, Al, and I think one of the recordings on Jackson McClow and sort of his having said, did I, to the question of like this,
I went up to him at Bard College after a conference, at the end of a conference. Erica was there, I believe, in 1999. I went up to Jackson and I said, he read actually Stein 100 in his reading, the Justice Chair one. I went up and said, Jackson, he read about 6 of them. I said, the number 100 is so beautiful. How did how did that work out? Something like that. And he refused really to take any credit for the beauty of it. He admitted it was beautiful, but he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and I just love how that leaves open even the question of whether there is a product per se with some of these works, because they are so processual in a lot of ways, and they're sort of realized in performance or in the reading kind of process. And I think in that sense, there's something very Phaedic about these. Like there's a social kind of element and a kind of beckoning and asking toward the reader or toward the listener. And even that kind of did I is sort of this, what thing are you talking about? And, is there even one made thing here that we might call the poem or that we might call the process even, because there is such a sort of plurality to these texts this week.
Yeah, if Jackson had been true to his art, this is a ridiculous thing to say, but sorry. If he'd been really, really rigorous and pure, he would spend the entire time talking about the process that generated it and probably wouldn't have read the poem, though he did like the poems. Or to put it another way, I mean, butter.
Yeah, but he would never do that because that would be too egoic. It would be focusing on his
still egoic.
Invention.
Yeah.
His invention, right?
That's true. I mean, butter is one thing, but making butter is what that poem is about.
I'm just thinking about Harry Matthews speaking about the Oulipians in the materials this week, saying the point is not to create works of literature, but to create methods that might be useful to writers.
Yes. Yeah, I'm being ridiculous because the poems are beautiful. And Jackson did spend plenty of time talking about his process. He certainly wrote about it enough. But after a while, I mean, like I was saying about making butter, making butter is the poem, not the butter. Who cares about butter? It's making butter. That's more important. I think we have someone on the phone. And after that, I want to ask Lainey to lead us in a conversation about Jackson, actually. I'm very excited about it because it's about politics. And this is one of those, you know, ModPo webcasts are often on a Wednesday. They're always on a Wednesday, except for the Final Words one, which is on a Monday. And that means inevitably we are talking the day after an election. And, you know, you would think that we would have that 50% of those years things would be really hunky-dory. But I seem to recall too many Wednesday, November webcasts that are bummers. Chris, do we have someone on the phone?
We do, Al.
Okay, Chris is scrambling.
Yeah, I can put them through now.
Okay.
Hey, Al, sorry. I'm
Yeah, that's
trying
all
to
right.
juggle some things over here.
That's all right.
Calling from Washington State, we have Lowell on the line.
Lowell Murphree. Oh, my God. Hey, Lowell, can you hear me?
Hey, I can perfectly.
How are you? You must be one of the longest standing ModPoers around.
I am one of the beginning ModPoers, you bet.
That's great. And I think,
very proudly.
Did you in fact move to your current location in the middle of your ModPo years, or have you always been out there in the West Coast?
No, always been here.
Yeah. And you have your avatar is O'Hara, or it used to be anyway, yeah?
It was. Yeah.
How are you?
It's still in my heart, still very much that.
Yeah, I remember
I'm well,
that.
thanks.
Great. It's really good to hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been involved with the Slowpo a lot this year and really enjoying it.
Great.
Enjoying all the comments that go with it. And
Great.
But with the discussion that we have right now, I do have a question.
Okay, please.
Randomness. So it draws back. If you draw back a little bit from the particular poet or the particular poem, my question is this, and I guess it could be applied to any period of poetry that we address. But does randomness, for instance, does it arise out of the hunger for randomness? Does that arise out of a particular social context? I'm thinking of each of the periods that we have looked at have their own social context, and when we get to this point, maybe we're too close to it to find an answer for that, but I'm just wondering if there is something in the air that we all breathe that makes us hunger for this kind of obsession with randomness.
Yeah, that's a well-articulated question. Thank you, Lowell. That's a great question, and I'm going to ask some of my colleagues to respond. But would you then hang up and listen to the responses through the live stream so someone else can call?
You bet.
Thank you, Lowell. Yep. Thanks for being part of the ModPo community. We really value your participation.
Well, you're welcome, and it's always a complete pleasure.
Thanks, Lowell. Come visit us sometime. It would be great to see you.
Okay.
All right. That was Lowell Murphree calling from Washington State. 10 years of ModPo, I think. I'm going to ask 4 respondents, but I'm going to ask each of you to be brief. Kate, Davey, Jason, and Gabby. And then I'm going to turn to Lainey, who's going to talk about Jackson. And actually, I think it follows something from Lowell's question about, is there something about our social political situation that leads to this? So, Kate, Davey, Jason, Gabby, quickly each.
I'm not sure if he meant now or
I think
contemporaneous.
He did. You mean now or recently? Mm-hmm.
Oh, recently. Well, yeah. I mean, everything in me wants to resist all social systems and norms lately, and I think aleatory poetry is one kind of sort of joyful, ecstatic way that one can do it. And really, I mean, I particularly recently feel extra constricted, and ceding control to a process or a method or a chance-based operation is is, kind of a delightful way to resist social strictures and all the others.
Beautifully put. Thank you. We're going to turn to Davey next. I just want to throw out a Jackson McClough anecdote. In 1955, the people of the United States were either made to celebrate or happily did celebrate in each of the big cities the 10-year anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb. This would be summer 1955, early August. And celebrate or commemorate, or anyway, the way they did it is they went into shelters. Everybody said, wow, 10 years later, atomic bomb. We're freaking worried. Let's go to shelters as a way of celebrating. It was a whole ghoulish thing. So Jackson and a bunch of activists, pacifists, anarcho-pacifists, decided that they would resist. They wouldn't go in shelters. They were actually arrested for not going into shelters to commemorate the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Anyway, Jackson was spurred to write not the very first, but the first big feast of aleatory poems, which were basically cut-ups. And he went crazy doing this. And it was really a response to this monstrous conformity. Kate's comment made me think of this. Like, the more everybody went into shelters to celebrate this, the more Jackson wanted to do things that people would decide didn't make any sense, would be totally random, because this was the best response to the randomness of the moment. Sorry, that took too long, but it's a good anecdote. Davey,
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
What you just said was making me think about how the texts, his source texts, were so often, Stein and Ginsberg were already socially resistant poets. So it's kind of, you have to consider your source text and your method when choosing what you're resisting.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it culminated in his stanzas for Eric Lezac later, when he basically just took articles and magazine articles and newspaper clippings and tracts and treatises and began to reorganize them through a chance operation system. So he moved away from the set sources into the daily sources. In fact, my favorite of all of these pieces was one about, it was an Esquire magazine piece by a pretty good writer, Dan Wakefield. And it was about the irony of preparing fallout shelters, because we couldn't survive. I mean, it was ridiculous to spend all that money on fallout shelters. It wasn't going to work to protect anybody. We were going to be incinerated inside the shelters. Mm-hmm. And Dan Wakefield wrote a snarky essay for Esquire magazine. It was completely coherent. Jackson thought, this is ridiculous. Dan and I agree on this, but I am going to cut up and reorganize Dan Wakefield's essay because it really shouldn't make any sense at all. And that was a big moment, a really big moment. Davey, a response to Lowell's question?
Something that I loved about Lowell's question is that Lowell asked a sociopolitically oriented question, and then Lowell rephrased it by asking, is there something in the air we breathe? And I took that to mean metaphorical air means sociopolitical context, but I think it was an astute reframing because it opened the question to think about the collapse of the environmental and the sociopolitical, which I think is actually really helpful for McClough, that we get these lines in Stein 100. The one that I think about all the time is toward the end of the poem, summer light bears a likeness to justice. And I think that what we get in these chance operations, and I think that, Al, the anecdote that you just told is really helpful for thinking about this, is a kind of an urgency of refusal that is not only a kind of resistance, but also a kind of futility. Like, at once to want to remake a relationship between the language that undergirds systems of racial capitalism, systems of violence that are informed and reproduced and inhere in the language of legislation, the language of public address, political language, et cetera. But to watch this language perform violence and to both want to refuse that violence and to feel uncertain as to the mechanisms available at that refusal. The language that's ready to hand, the language in the newspaper, is both the first thing you can grab. This is an urgent process. This is like a constant process of remaking. And it's a form of language that, like, remaking it in the poem and it's circulating in the poem in the small context in which it circulates doesn't change the way that it circulates in the newspaper. And so it's that relationship between urgency and futility that is interesting to me here. And I think that the really short answer to Lowell's question is yes, absolutely. But I also think that figuring out how that kind of practice of refusal happens and what that refusal actually does is something that I think about going back to McCloskey.
Thank you. This is such a great discussion we're having in response to Lowell. So thank you, Jason and Gabby. Brief responses each to Lowell, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lainey.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of reading your book, Al, and that helps me. So I highly recommend Al's book to everyone, especially to think about questions like this, because in the aftermath of, like, to think about the 1955 as being the 10-year anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and for that to be celebrated is kind of horrifying. And it makes sense that that out of something which it's something that certainly shouldn't be celebrated, but thought about. But I think that also it's something that can't be digested. It's something like swallowing a quarter, that that the seeming, like, flow of history up to our present time, for it to seem coherent. I guess there are two things, like coherent and inevitable, are things that are worthy of resisting, and that and the memory of the Holocaust and those horrible things, and then going forward into the Vietnam War and all sorts of things that make no sense, but we're kind of given blankets of sense from elsewhere to apply to them.
Yeah.
And so, and it, you know, Jenna's dropping leaflets, I think, is important to contrast to McCloskey and Cage choosing as their, I guess, oracle texts, literary, already counter narrative texts.
Yes.
But Jenna's, I think that the beginning of that, the invasion of Iraq, and that we were dropping leaflets from airplanes from way high above the ground that would just kind of scatter like precipitation from the clouds onto the ground, and how weird and random that blurting of it's such a weird mode of speech, and scary mode of speech, that I think we have to, that Jenna's poem kind of gets at it conveys more directly the the kind of act of just on a personal level, resisting given coherent narratives of the absolutely incoherent.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. The more there were attempts to make coherent narratives of the various disasters of the 20th century, the more acutely there were revivals of Dadaism, of surrealism in the late 50s, the work of people like Jerry Rothenberg trying to unify a sense of the disaster with a new kind of surrealism, and culminating in, anti-war gestures such as those of the Yippies in 1968. That's what you get, and this is really relevant to that. What I want to do is ask Lainey to lead us in a conversation, and I've figured out, sort of keeping track of whose turn it is to speak. I've got Erica, Jake, Allie, and Lily, who might be, and Dave, who just joined us. So Dave,
Erica, Jake.
Dave, Erica, Jake, Allie, Lily. Lainey?
All right.
And by the way, while Lainey's leading us in this discussion, you could call us at 610-616-3208. We're going to take one more call if there is one. Lainey Brown.
Jackson McClough. So we've already been having this discussion, but we'll continue. So the poet Ann Tardos, who was Jackson's longtime partner and collaborator, wrote about him. Jackson's universal instruction to performers was to, quote, listen and relate with no ego tripping. It was clear that this direction was a political one, pointing to his vision of a utopian society in a pacifist, anarchist world. So my question is, how can we connect these concepts, politics, utopia, pacifist, anarchism, with the use of chants in any of the works this week? So.
And by the way, I just have to be reminded that after Jason, Gabby was going to follow to talk about Lowell. So I want to, can I add Gabby to the conversation, since we're talking about the
Sure.
relation of politics to the randomness? Gabby, sorry about that. So we've got a bunch of responses.
Yeah. Gabby.
Oh, Gabby gets to go first.
Oh, you totally set me up in such a bad position by making me go first on a
Do you
new
want to go
question.
last?
I do want to go last.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Lady?
It's not really fair to ask Dave because Dave just got here. So why don't I ask Erica? Erica, are you ready? Are you game? Great.
Yeah, I'm game, and I really appreciate being reminded of those directions. And it seems to me like this idea of listening and relating without ego tripping really almost embodies what I understand to be the political aspect of chants and procedural work, in that, there's this radical unpredictability that you have to open yourself up to, or radical unknowability is, I think, a term that Joan Ritalik uses. And what that means is that you have to stop focusing on the self and what you believe, and prepare yourself to really actively listen to what you receive, instead of, predetermining what you do or don't think and where you align yourself on the political spectrum. It's really more about listening and hearing and then making those kinds of decisions. And, on the idea of anarchism, I think that the very act of generating poetry through these kinds of processes is an anarchic statement, I think. So I hope that's a starting place, at least.
That's fantastic. That's so crystalline. I'm just going to repeat: radical unknowability, and listen to what you are receiving. Thank you so much, Erica. Jake.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lainey. Thank you for it. And maybe just worth, restating it, because it's a complicated question. So what is the common thread there? Jason McClough's work and the work of others, insofar as like a response to political vision and anarchism and a few other things, Lainey, that you mentioned. Can you just say like the full list?
Sure. So the instruction was to listen and relate with no ego tripping. Right. And it was clear that this direction was a political one, pointing to his vision of a utopian society in a pacifist, anarchist world. And then I asked, how can we connect these concepts to the use of chance, politics, utopia, pacifist anarchism? In other words, how does the use of chance connect?
Right. Yeah, great. Thank you. I don't know. I just like the first thing that comes to mind is like a relationship between a process like Jason McCloskey and the process of the Dada poets had used, and how much Dada had to do with World War I and response to that kind of like chaos that was brought to the world. And so in a way, I think this kind of work, this kind of radical cutting and reshuffling and chance is also a response. And this maybe goes back to Lowell's question too, like what's in the air. What's in the air is a response to these really heavy events that are happening, and conceptually just wanting to get as far away from that as possible and do something else. And that's one piece, and the other piece is maybe like just focusing on the process so much is it's kind of a political response and an anarchist response, because it's essentially kind of like a spiritual practice. It is a practice that is doing something else, and something that's radically different than what people have been doing for a while, and is a kind of a remaking, rethinking of the world, and is an alternative.
That's great. Thank you so much. I like that you use the word spiritual too, because I feel like even though it's there's almost a phobia about talking about it in intellectual circles of poets. But I mean, it's very much there, the Buddhism, serious Buddhism and contemplative practice. So thank you so much. Allie.
Yeah, it's also to think about spirituality as kind of coming into play in a question like fate or like destiny, or predeterminism, which some people were talking about in my office hour earlier today, can kind of be like a counterpoint to chance, or like another way of interpreting chance. And so there's something about reading those things which you might read as fate or something predetermined as chance that is equalizing in kind of like making that spirituality like secular. And I also think like you can't really have a plan or a will to exert in order to be like, if you're going to be radically open to chance. And it just makes me think of like conditions of improv, like in a kind of like ideal improvisational space. You don't go in with a plan. Your goal is to be as acutely sensitive to other people as possible, and be reactive as opposed to premeditated, which gets back to that kind of idea of like predeterminism as well. And so, yeah, it's like there's an ethic of care in there as well, and just like reacting to what other people do, and it kind of becomes this like domino effect of like, if everyone is just reacting to the kind of like egolessness of other people, I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine, because unfortunately our reality is so not that. But it is this like really beautiful ideal to kind of like dwell in conceiving of.
Beautiful. You're making me think about the now, right? Like if the performers have to be acutely sensitive, that's going to be different with every performance. It makes me think back to Stein and repetition, right? The resistance, free will is part of resistance, and deciding to employ the use of chance and be aware of everybody co-creating and performing is a really important part of that. I just twisted my words. Important part of that. Thanks, Allie. Lily.
Yeah, I think if one of the things that anarcho-pacifism is rejecting is a sense of sort of like a compulsory patriotism and like definition of your nationhood that is kind of part of your definition of your self and is based in these violent acts, etc. Like one way to try and combat that is to ask people not to come in with a preconceived plan or idea or ego and create something that is different every time you perform it and can't therefore become a new rallying anthem as like each individual piece. It's more the open process that becomes the thing that gets carried forward instead of this like definition of war making and other like violent things that are involved in nationhood.
I love that. Yeah. Unique, like the uniqueness is inherent in the moment and coexisting between the people, as opposed to this isolated idea of I'm going to make up some brilliant thing alone that it doesn't involve anyone else. Awesome. Thanks, Lily. Dave.
This is a really cool quote. Listening and relating without ego, leading to utopia. Do you know when he said that? Was that in the 60s or 70s?
So this is Ann Tardos writing about Jackson, and I pulled it from, there was a show of his work in New York City, and I think it was 2017 at the Drawing Studio. I mixed those two up, with all of his beautiful visual art. So like we have the one example, the performance score, that's all over the page, right? The beautiful elegy. But he was a really prolific visual artist, if you can think of performance scores in the visual sense, which Anne does and the show did. So that's where I pulled it from. I think she wrote it for the book, which was, I think, 2017.
That's interesting. To me, this whole concept of taking ego out of the equation to lead to a pacifist anarchist utopia, that almost seems prescient. I mean, it's basically about removing personal identity from the process of living in society. That's how I interpret it. And that actually is something a lot of political scientists and a lot of political psychologists are doing work about. Liliana Mason has a book called Uncivil Agreement, and she's done a lot of work on this with Leona Huddy about how increasingly, since the 60s, our entire society has grown to conflate political ideology with personal identity. And when they do that, when it becomes part of their identity, it becomes solidified. And when people express other views about how to live in society, other political views, they don't see that as just a different ideology. They see that as a threat to their personal identity. So in a sense, this whole observation is almost prescient because it's being borne out by the way this research shows us identity can be a problem. Identity can get in the way of just living in the world. So that's just sort of my observation.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yeah, I should add that Jackson also wrote that, of course, it's impossible to take our ego completely out, but that still it's a good idea to try because there's just so much of it, right? Thank you. And now we go to Gabby.
Yeah, I feel like I'm thinking so hard about the thing I want to say, which is a little bit difficult here. I feel like steam's coming out of my head a little bit. So forgive me for whatever does come out. So I'm having a bit of a trouble this week. And the trouble that I'm having is like, I feel like the general sort of narrative of this week and the one that we have now is like, if social convention, order, norms are death dealing, therefore there's a kind of interest, pleasure, and ethics in breaking those, in randomness and chance and different kinds of relation. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, it's part of it at least. Okay, the problem I'm having is that I feel like the 21st century, more than Cage's time, at least, more than, McLow's time, convention breakage is more inscribed into convention than it has ever been, in the sense that I feel like nowadays, especially in the American context, like part of the ways that conventions, political systems, and ideologies propel themselves is by temporarily failing and showing their work. I'll give my example. I think the best example I could give is like political apologies. So like apologies for war crimes, or like say like the CIA or the FBI or whatever finally says, okay, yeah, we did assassinate MLK. Like there's the sort of like time gap, the gesture of apology. It's like we no longer have to take blame because we have a generational gap. We have the movement of time and we have the apology. But actually, we're still doing all the stuff that we were doing before, but there's just this gap. Or, for example, like the Trump thing, where people are saying like Trump feels unprecedented, it feels impossible, and yet at the same time, it's actually deeply conventional in the same way. So there's something about the ongoing death-dealing devices of like American imperial ideology that like likes to fail, actually. Like, people like, here's another random example. People like to like target Republicans and be like, haha, you made this mistake, you said this wrong thing, but also they like do that on purpose every so often. Okay. The reason I'm having a problem with this is like, there are norms we like, actually. Like all of us showed up to this in clothing. That's a norm we all like. We would actually probably be very upset if one of us showed up without clothing, right? So we have attachments norms. We get things out of them. We do things with them. Maybe the question is, and this is where I'm like having a little bit of trouble in at least how we're working with the poems, is like, maybe what we need is better libidinal attachments, better norms, better conventional attachments, better forms of genre, better forms of like moving forward in the world. And so I actually think that Cage is already doing that. I mean, in the sense that all this stuff that looks like randomness is not actually randomness in any way, shape, or form. Like that's what I think is great about the prepared piano. It's like, it seems accidental, it seems wrong, but there's like a deep intimacy to the like working through the mechanics of the thing and then playing this thing that's actually really beautiful. And I think what I'm saying is like the fetish for chance as the way out of convention feels like it doesn't account for the way that like there's breakage systems that actually are like sustaining of death dealing systems or something like that. Sorry, that's like a lot, but just throwing that in there.
Gabby, that's fantastic and a real challenge. And I have a feeling that when we do in a few minutes, when we do a round of final thoughts, I think a number of people are going to want to respond to what you just said. I hope they will. So what I want to do first is just play 30 seconds, 45 seconds of Joan Retallack talking about her piece where she's throwing out her books, because it was mentioned earlier. It doesn't follow entirely from what Gabby just said, but then we'll go to final thoughts and everybody will get a chance. So what I'd like to do is ask, and this is a lightning round, Kate, Davey, Kinar, and Dave Poplar to respond each very briefly to just what you hear when you hear Joan at the beginning of this piece. So here's Joan Retallack introducing Not a Cage.
The next thing that I'm going to read is a poem dedicated to John Cage, which is called Not a Cage, which is based on first and last lines from books that I was discarding or selling or giving away. I think as a way of assuaging my guilt for not having read them. I collected the beginnings and the endings. Scientific, sorry, I have 2 copies of this book here. It's not all fitting. Scientific inquiry, seen in a very broad perspective, may see foot 1957, also Wettermark 1906, chapter 13. To man seek, the world is twofold, in accordance with that witness is now or in the future. It wasn't until the waitress brought her Benedictine and she, Villandry, Les Douves, Parazé, Le Rideau, mine, yours, Cynthia, not a building, this earth, not a cage, the artist, disciple, abundant, multiple, restless, a forgery, opus, Loonus, Bellini, we named you, I thought the earth is possible.
I love that poem. Okay, so Kate, Davy, Knar, and Dave, say something about what she's doing there or what you're thinking as you hear, especially the introduction.
Well, with that piece in particular, I'm thinking about how, her use of chanciness and, gestures at randomness make me want to make connections, like to figure out what all these texts are that she's discarded. What's the connection between them? Why is she getting rid of them? So sometimes chanciness just raises different questions, I guess, than the ones that are being pulled apart.
Yeah, that's great. And you're hinting at our guest that she has a different attitude toward each of the books. She probably doesn't even know exactly why she's getting rid of any individual book because it's just a big stack. Some she looks and longingly says, I'm just never going to have time to read that book, but I really would like to. And another is, this is a novel I bought when I thought I really wanted to read novels, but I don't like novels, or something like that. So Kate, follow up. What is our work? What do we do when hearing this piece? What's our role?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this work is trying to resist the mind's and the language that informs the mind's desire to make connections. It's trying to foil that that want and that automatic impulse of the mind, but my mind just wants to make new and different connections.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It both illuminates that want for connectivity and, I don't know, I guess reroutes it to a degree.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Davy, quick thought on this?
Sure. The thought that it occurs to me to have is actually putting this in dialogue with something that Gabby was saying a minute ago about what we think randomness is in the Week 9 poems, and that the constraint that Ritalik has of the first and last lines from books that she's discarding, those books aren't there randomly. Those books are instances of wanting to be in a certain kind of relation, of wanting to have a certain kind of vocabulary, of wanting to have a certain kind of shared text with others who have read the same book, but never getting there, of having a desire that is, never gets realized if the desire is to read something, to have read something. And that's a helpful way of maybe reframing some of the conversation that we have around the Week 9 poems, is to think about maybe not exactly about randomness, but about variation within a defined set of parameters, where we might pay as much attention to the defined set of parameters, the leaflets that Jenna Osman is engaging with, the why those are the books that Joan Retallack owns, and why those are the books that she's discarding, where the parameters of the constraint within which randomness occurs produces a certain kind of relation, and we might temper our interest in thinking about a kind of expansive randomness by thinking about how the field of randomness is defined.
Great, Davey. Thank you so much. Kinar, followed by Dave, and then we'll do final words.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I'm thinking about here, it has to do with, what exactly is it to be kind of present, to be kind of inhabiting the present, the present, and sort of to do so in a way that might yield different possibilities, right? Ones that are less of the kind of hegemonic structures that we already know. And, taking these elements from beginnings and endings, it's like, you end up with this composite document of these kind of threshold moments in texts that are kind of hingy, and you don't quite know the relation to them, and you're kind of asked to do things with them in this very kind of present way. And I guess, I don't know, I think it's a really interesting kind of poem to read, and maybe even to try and do oneself to kind of follow that procedure, and to think about, what kinds of connections sort of bloom from disconnects of varying sorts, and what kinds of triggers can allow our minds to move to places maybe they wouldn't otherwise move to. So yeah, that was a little bit of a random thought. Sorry, I don't know if that was quite coherent
Somehow that
or
seems
intelligible.
Perfectly right. Thank you, Kinar. Okay, Dave Poplar, and then I'll have an announcement followed by our final thoughts.
I love that this is a poem born from guilt. I think that's kind of funny. It's funny that the point of it isn't about the substance of these books as much as it's giving away something, because it's almost recognizing how there's something about collecting books, and that represents something. It's like a symbolic thing that's maybe even separate from their content, like even just showing off bookcases. I mean, I've even seen like some people set up their Zoom camera in front of books to make it look impressive or something like that. It's really weird that people do that.
Present company accepted.
And this poem seems to sort of almost commemorate that symbolism of this, that's also overtly separated from the actual content of the books by taking the first line and the last line. Symbolically, you're getting as far away from the content. You're taking the pieces of bread, not the sandwich inside. You're taking that and making that the poem. So it's almost like a meta appreciation of the symbolism that is separate from the actual underlying content.
Well said. Thank you, Dave. Okay, final thoughts. Before we get to final thoughts, I just want to announce that next week will be our Week 10 weekly webcast. This will be our last regular webcast. It'll be at noon. And Erica Kaufman will be here because November 10th is Erica Kaufman Day here at the Writers' House. It's going to be at least a triple header, but if we schedule a video on Poethical Wager, it'll be a quadruple header. Erica is going to join us for the webcast at noon. Erica's going to join us for an episode of Poem Talk at, 3 o'clock. And then Erica is going to give a poetry reading at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And we want every ModPoer who is in shouting distance of this webcast to mark their calendars right now, 6 p.m., November 10th, for a reading. We'll send out that link. So I'm really excited about that. And then a few days later, at the end of Week 10, Monday, the day after the final day of Week 10, our traditional Final Words webcast. and that will be at noon also, Monday, November 15th. And during that webcast, we will do nothing but offer our final words. So the TAs, Lainey, I, maybe even Zach and Chris, and more importantly, people in the various forums, and especially by phone. We hope that everybody will share their final thoughts about ModPo 2021. Okay, so we want final thoughts here, quick final thoughts. We're going to start. Kate had to leave, so we're going to start with Davey and go to Erica next.
All right, I'm going to cede my final thought to 2 questions from the Poetical Wager. Here are those 2 questions. These are in Joan Retalic's words. Are we systematically discouraged from engaging in sustained projects that can give us the cumulative pleasures of a meaningful challenge, as well as the capacity for effective agency? Has, in fact, investment in this kind of time-consuming experience come to be seen as threatening to the necessarily short-sighted goals of a consumer culture whose profit margins are based on constantly changing appetites for instant gratification? I like those questions because they remind us that part of what we're doing is in ModPo with each other is making conscious decisions about how to use our time and to engage in the tiny project available in uneven ways to all people, to think about how we use time and to think about time as in relation to capitalism and time as in relation to resistance, and to spend that time with each other. And so I wanted to draw those questions into the room.
Thank you, Davey, and thanks for joining us this webcast. We have missed you, but it's great to have you for these 2. All right, so Erica is up next for a final thought, followed by Jason.
Thank you. I'm super excited for next week. And for my final thought, I want to ballyhoo Joan Retalic's newest book of poems, an excerpt of which is in ModPo Plus, and it's called Boshed, and the subtitle is Fables, Moral Tales, and Other Awkward Constructions. And it's a very different book from the Joan Retalich that we have in ModPo. And I would just really encourage folks to read it because I think it helps us expand what we're talking about regarding chance and aleatory work. And I'm going to have to jump off. So thank you all. And I can't wait for next week.
We are so looking forward to it, Erica. See you here in Philly. Thank you. All right, Jason, followed by Jake.
I think that what Gabby said before was really challenging and important, and that that the work, in a way, is not random or pure chance, but in itself, because the thing is in like divination acts of like reading tarot cards or reading tea leaves or assigning meaning to the appearance of certain birds. All of those are ways of using, say, a chance process to arrive actually at some kind of certainty or some sort of sense of the interconnectedness of everything down to the like atomic level, so that but in that model there in a sense isn't chance, because rather than being indeterminate, chance is the way to reveal what is determined. I don't know if that made sense.
It does.
Okay. But I think that what is really important about all the work this week is that all of them, and it's interesting how they have to, all the works have to foreground the procedure in a way that other poems don't have to foreground their procedure. So if all poems foregrounded their procedure, these might feel less surprising. But in a way, like the presence of the procedure and then the, say, normally coherent result, I think like what they do is challenge readers' expectations and like on a more primal level, like a deep desire for authorship, for like a self-enacting author to provide a model, the reader, of a coherent self, unconsciously affirming one's own self, or kind of allowing the reader to feel like I too have a coherent self.
Yeah.
Instead of the thing that, and everything in our culture is talking to us. If you go out in a city landscape, you are anticipated by that landscape that is advertising to you. And so there's an illusion that, yes, the world is talking to me, my coherent self, rather than me being an assemblage of accident over time. And that, in a way, these poems can provide a way into feeling the joy of assemblage,
nice,
of being put together, not by thousands of different strands of chance,
right,
lead us to be, here who we are right now.
Right. Thank you, Jason. That was great. Okay, so thank you, Jake, followed by Allie. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just unfurling myself out of the labyrinth of Jason's awesome comment here. I want to just say this is a slightly different direction. This past weekend, I introduced my kids, who are 7 and 10, to Corpse Exquisite, game, which is not exactly like a procedural thing, but it's in the same kind of vein.
What's the name of the game?
I had so much
Jake?
fun. Corpse Exquisite, where you write a line and then you pass it to somebody and they fold it.
Exquisite Corpse. I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and then everybody just kind of like comments on the line that's right before them, but they don't know what came before that. So it's kind of like a veering of the line of thought that happens, and it's random and it's funny and it's like really just fun to do, and they loved it. And what it just made me think of is like this kind of poetry, procedural poetry, is a lot more fun to make than to read, is what I think. and I also think that like whenever you're reading a procedural poem, like I don't know, I think like part of reading it is trying to follow the procedure and trying to make your own version of it. Right. And maybe doing that is at least as valuable as the reading itself of the piece that comes out.
That's really good. And I think that Bernadette Mayer, among others, realizes that and keeps saying, you should try this, you should do this, you can do it, here are some guidance. And, I think that's totally right. And that's why the last assignment, the essay assignment, the fourth one in ModPo, is make your own. Because that's the best way to learn about this stuff. Okay. Allie, followed by Lily. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this thought's kind of like directly going off what Jake was saying, thinking about the assignment that I know a lot of people are going to be doing or have already started, which is, I think it can be kind of easy to think of like aleatory poetry as kind of like, not a binary, but like there are two ends, and one end is procedure and the other end is product. Although product is like too probably like capitalistic of like a word to use for it, but like one end is result. But I also think that's like really important, and that will be really important in like doing this assignment, is, and I guess I'm thinking about assignment 2 and kind of analyzing the work that you've done, is the process of reading the result of your procedure. Because I mean, we can come at someone else's experience as readers, and that there's a thrill in that, but there's also, I think, a thrill in being the composer of a result, just seeing, like, there's a process of reading and the type of sense making that you're doing in reading what you've made that is separate from the actual procedure of making it. And I think that it's important to pay attention to that as well as you're kind of doing it.
Nice. This, a lot of us have said this today. It's important for people who are new to this material to see how important it is to pay attention to the relative non-opacity of the process of making. Because I think that from the romantic ideologists up through, even including modernism, imagism, for instance, you know, all the workings, like what Pound did to H.D.'s poems, needed to be transparent as a process. What results from it, it occludes Pound's hand in it. We really have to consider that the art is the making, and there's a truth in that, a revelation in that, an honesty in that as well. Lily, followed by Kinar.
My final word is, speaking of randomness and time, is that don't forget that on Sunday in the US at least, we'll be setting the clocks back at the end of daylight savings time, which can be sad, but also it's the only day of the year with 25 hours in it. So maybe you can have an exciting procedure, but not if you live in Arizona, as Dave reminds us. Only apply the 25-hour procedure if you live somewhere where the clocks will be set back.
Lily, that's such a Lily final thought. I love it. I totally love it. There's an artist named George, a visual artist, maybe a painter who's part of ModPo and is in Glasgow. And they went to savings time already, so he was an hour late to the office hour this morning. So everybody's changing at different times. Thank you, Lily. Kinar, followed by Gabby.
So I'm thinking a little about how maybe we might spend some more time with Bernadette Mayer in my office hours. So this is sort of a soft recruitment. If anyone would like to pop in there, maybe we can do some kind of procedural co-compositions or some such thing. Hands-on, words-on activity. So that's at 6 tomorrow, and that will be on Zoom.
Soft recruitment as the obverse of ballyhoo. Soft recruitment. Turns out to be like a ballyhoo. Thank you, Gabby, followed by Dave.
Yeah, I want to temper or add to my earlier response by reference to two things. One is Lainey's point. I mean, honestly, I think 20 minutes into the webcast, way long ago, which was what's happening here is a invention and plurality of techniques for making writing happen in different ways that we haven't done before. So I really appreciate that as a way of thinking about this week, way of thinking about language poetry, a way of thinking about conceptualism, week 10 stuff. I think that's right, and I think that's quite a good way of thinking about it. And I'm bringing that up in light also of when I made the comment that I made, Miranda Chubb in the YouTube chat said, maybe chance poetry is how we figure out what we want to attach to instead, or how we test out the kind of thing we might want instead. And I think that's quite right too. And I think those two comments are kind of saying shared things. So I wanted to bring them up. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Gabe. And we won't see you for the final 2 webcasts.
I'm here in spirit and in text, but not in video.
That's right. You will be doing office hours, and we will see you in the forums, but we won't see you for the final 2 webcasts. So great goings on in your life, and we love you a lot, and I'm sure we'll catch up through Slowpo. There you are. There you are.
I love you.
No, I love you. No, I love you first. Dave Poplar, followed by Lainey.
I was just thinking about something, so I'll just throw it out there and see if it sticks. But generally, the impression I get from this week, what it seems to be about is really pushing the extremes of poetry to show us how the work itself is not the point here. It's really all about the interpretation, which means it's all about what we bring to it. It's all about us. We are giving it the value ourselves. It's not in that thing at all, because these things are beside the point almost. And I like that concept, and it just makes me think how this concept could really apply to other areas of life, like collecting baseball cards, the value of baseball cards. People don't value them based on the paper, the printing. It's something else. We give them the value. We put that value into those objects, and it's just interesting to really be forced to acknowledge how throughout society, a lot of what we consider inherent value is really just like what we bring to it. So that's just the thought I had. And also, I have office hours tonight. That's all.
You have office hours at 11 p.m. Philadelphia time, I believe. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, great. Lainey Brown, final thought.
I'm going to ballyhoo Bernadette Mayer's writing experiments, which we have in ModPo Plus this week. They're just fantastic. They're just amazing. They never get old. Spend some time. Try them one, try them all, see what happens.
We are on the same wavelength. My final thought is to refer to one of those writing experiments, Lainey. And I've been thinking a lot about how, as it gets a little cooler here in the Northern Hemisphere, U.S. finally gets a little cooler, how we really need to keep going outside. It's just healthier for us. And if you're in a crowded place, you need a mask, that's fine. But get out and write. Get out and write. Get out and walk right. So here's what Bernadette says in regards to that, and that will be our final thought. We're going to sign off right after that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Chris and Zach. Despite the fact that Zach is wearing his Philadelphia Phillies hat, which irritates me no end every time he wears it, he's still a really good guy. And we are also happy to announce, and we'll say more about this as time goes on, that the ModPo team and others from the Writers House will be visiting Los Angeles in February, early February. We can't wait to meet all of you West Coast people. I hope people will journey from Arizona and from Washington State. Maybe Lowell Murphree will meet us from Washington State and others. That'll be fun. All right, here's Bernadette. Structure a poem or prose writing according to city streets, miles, walks. For example, take a 14-block walk, writing one line per block to create a sonnet. What a great idea. Why aren't we fucking doing that?
We are doing it.
Are we doing it?
Yeah.
Are you doing it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's being done. For example, take a 14-walk block. Okay. Make a sonnet. Choose a city street familiar to you, walk it, make notes, and use them to create a poem. Take a long walk with a group of writers. Observe, make notes, create works, then compare them. Take a long walk, write one line, one sentence per mile. Do it every day, make variations. Yay, walking. Yay, writing. You guys are the best. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks all over the world to people who are joining us. Thanks to Lowell for calling us, and for everybody who participate in the chats. We will see you on Erica Kaufman Day a week from today, and we'll see you in the forums before that. Bye.